right, we're going to call to order our board workshop. It's 5 o'clock. I'm going to declare a quorum of 7 members present. Item C, public comment. Ms. Horn? No comment. We will move to item D. Item 1, consideration, discussion, possible action regarding the College Station ISD board operating procedures. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Horak, board members. First item of business is to review the board operating procedures. Let me tell you you have a paper copy at your place, but let me kind of tell you what I did. I took the comments that I received collectively through the last several days and last week, placed them within the document in red to draw attention to them. There weren't any particular recommendations or questions for clarity or to delete, so to speak, but more additions too. So I highlighted those and I thought we'd go page by page. We're not looking for any necessarily closure or action this evening, but we'll go through and touch on each of those particular recommendations, build consensus, or see if we need to revise or edit based on those recommendations, and hopefully come back next month with a clean document for approval and consideration. So with that being said, I put these notes are for myself because Mr. Glenwinkle and I are going to go through once we're finished, probably before next month, and give this thing a facelift. It looks like it was done a while ago, and I suspect the title page and the divider pages have never been edited, so I think we can do something a little more visually pleasing with those. So those are just really notes to myself. The first item or recommendation, which I think is a strong one, is before we ever start the document to insert our core beliefs and commitments, the board's core beliefs and commitments, as well as the components, I would say the goals and the specific results associated with our current strategic plan. So that would fit nicely. We can lay that in there before we get to the ethics piece altogether. I didn't really ask for consensus. I assume everyone would agree with that. Okay. Ethics, there was one consideration to add here. Now, let me mention on ethics page, and policy is referenced at the bottom of each of these, but the ethics in particular are a result of BBF local. So any adjustments we make to this particular page would need to be followed up with just a consent item, changing the wording of that policy and adding or whatever adjustments we might make to this one. So no, this particular page is tied directly to local policy. And well, the last time it was revised was in 2000. So you can see this is 22 years old. So the suggestion for addition is under honor and conduct number 5, and I numbered these as well. You won't see this in the operating document that's online. I numbered and lettered things just for reference for us to be able to find things easier. I will avoid making public statements about the district that are not constructive. So feedback on that one, is everyone good with that or not, and so on and so forth. So I'll pause for feedback from the group, if there is any.
My only concern with that is it's kind of vague, and you know what is constructive, what is not constructive. Yeah, I don't know. I just that would be my concern, is how do we define being constructive or not being constructive?
That was my first thought too. In fact, I was reading through some of the others to see if there were other things that were kind of vague as well. And so far I haven't really found one. I mean, most of them are more straightforward. I mean, there's some vague words in there, right? Fair and just impartial. But.
So the question is that we reword to make it a little more not as vague, or do we need to edit at all? Is the direction I need from the collective group.
if no one else has any concerns about it being too vague, then maybe I'm just reading too much into it.
No, I think it's vague, and like Kim said, it doesn't seem to match the definitive nature of other bullet points. And so if it is trying to preclude something from happening or address something that has happened, making it more a tighter vocabulary would help. Because arguably anything said subjectively could be constructive. It's just who's receiving it to be destructive. Is this meant to any specific thing that's supposed to be addressing?
I think when you look at it, I mean, because there's constructive criticism. I mean, let's break it down. There is such thing. So I can kind of see where Mr. Ben's going with the fact that it does appear to be too vague. So maybe the statement's okay, but that last wording needs to be more definite. But I don't, off the top of my head, know where that, we might need to bring Ms. Parker in on this one.
Detrimental to the proceedings or reputation of, then would detrimental be a more accurate word? Avoid making public statements that are detrimental to the district and its mission.
Maybe add not constructive to the mission of the district.
So Mr. Hall has recommended statements about the district that are not constructive to the mission of the district, correct, Mr. Hall? Is that what we have floating out there? Is that a little more clear or concise for the group? Now, this is consensus of the group. This is board operating procedures, not necessarily superintendent operating procedures, even though this does operate with the team of 8. This is the consensus of the collective 7.
Can I ask a question? When I was looking at some of these, kind of benchmarking some other districts, this list looked very similar in at least a couple of other, at least one other district. It was almost exactly the same. So I was just wondering where this original list, do you know, does it come from CSISD? Does it come?
I have no idea.
No idea, yeah.
Ms. McAdams. And I'm looking, and again, I'm looking at the last, or when this was issued in 2000. And since it's in policy, if any changes were made to this since then, it would have to been captured and change of policy, and it would be documented there. So based on that, that tells me this document or this piece of it is 22 years old, which is before my time here. So I could not really tell you the origins of this piece. I'll tell you what, let's let that one kind of float and marinate a little bit, and we'll come back to it, okay? Because I think the others are probably easier to process, right? So let's move forward off this one. Again, I'll make adjustments and edit title page just so it's a little more aesthetically pleasing. Role of the board and authority of board members, executive session. There were no recommendations, questions, or clarifying comments communicated on that one. The next one where I received some feedback as far as possible edits were associated with communication. So if you will turn to page 6, you'll see the next set of red markings. This was mentioned to me, and I went through and did a little cleanup on this, so you can see the strike through and then where I added in red. So some of these particular items in communication would say to the board president, and the other ones say tell the superintendent, and vice versa. We are pretty good as a collective group that when somebody emails me or emails Jeff, that we copy, that the other is copied. So I was really just trying to make this consistent. So in essence, if there's communications to the board president, there is to the superintendent, and vice versa Quite frankly, I like that because then I know and I don't forget to check or there's not an oversight on if there's a communication between the board president and myself. So all this does is add the board president or the superintendent as opposed to so on and so forth. It's an inclusive statement. That's it. Are there any questions or any hangups on that one? Okay. The next one is recommended was item 6. This is under citizen request complaint to individual board members. So it kind of gives you steps through if someone comes with a concern to you. I think everyone's familiar with this. Our new board members have seen this in their hour 3 training as well. The suggestion was to add statement 6, and I think it's pretty solid. It just gives each of you one more piece of reference to have if you have any of these particular questions or folks approach you. And it, as stated here, board members may remind the person sharing the concern the board member wishes to remain impartial in the event the concern or complaint becomes a grievance that is subject to board review. So obviously in our grievance process, there's 3 levels. Typically, if it's something that begins at the campus, we'll start with that campus administration, move to level 2, which is central office, and anything that's beyond that will go level 3 to the board of trustees. So this is probably just a nice piece to have in there as a reminder to the group, but it also gives you something, again, if you're having one of those conversations where you may have to let folks know, hey, you need to communicate with this administrator or this is the appropriate person. Thank you for sharing that information. It allows folks from getting too far in the weeds with you over things that you could very well possibly hear in a formal hearing process. Thoughts? Good? I think that was a good suggestion.
Can I just say that we may want to add it to the, right below it in the employee request complaint section as well? It applies there as well, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
we can duplicate that. I'm looking at note takers on the side because they have copies as well, so I don't miss this. I guess we can always watch the recording, right? Yes, we can add that as well there, Kimberly. Let's see, top of page 7.
Mr. Martindale, can we go
Hey.
back to employee request complaint to individual board member?
Yes, sir.
Where we've tentatively added in the board member is encouraged to notify the superintendent and board president as quickly as possible after learning of an issue. I guess my only concern there would be if we're immediately getting the board president involved, is that kind of stepping outside of our role of governance and getting into what should just be, or maybe is your
I
your
can see
parameter.
that. I was trying to be consistent, but you do have a point, Mr. Ben. Typically, yes, if it's an employee or personnel matter, it comes straight to me. So I probably will scratch that. Let's see, number 3 on the top of page 7. This was mentioned, and actually, I think I shared a planning calendar with the group, but it has been probably longer than a year ago. We have an internal planning calendar that we work off of as an administrative team that reminds us of what things we need to make sure are happening each month on an annual basis, and we actually project that out to like 2025. So I added this in there just to make it routine that we annually, or I will annually provide just a 12-month planning calendar to the board with anticipated reports and different items that should occur each of those particular months, like approving the budget in August and so on and so forth. General items, and you can also kind of see how we've planned out board reports. I will share that with you, understanding that they're tentative. Sometimes we make adjustments depending on things that might come up, but at least it gives you an overview of the year. The only thing I may add to this, I may date it to hold myself accountable and probably share that out in July of each year for the next year. So as we enter in the school year, you have something, beginning July, August that runs you through the course of that school year. Let me see. I'm going to fast forward. I didn't receive any comments on these. A reminder on constituent phone calls, letters, electronic communication, and everyone is aware we don't do anonymous. We don't address anonymous communication. So I'm going to push forward to page 14 because there's quite a bit there. I'm sorry. Page 7, I struck through G because since this document's been updated, that law has changed. You cannot limit the number of speakers for non-agenda items. So that'll be a strike through and remove.
Mr. Martineau, can y'all check on one other thing
Yes, sir.
on that section where it says under 2E, each speaker is limited to one opportunity at the microphone regardless of minutes used. I think there was a statutory change in addition to the one you've already noted that says a speaker can speak multiple times on different agenda items. And again, I could be wrong, but if y'all could just check on that, that would be, because if somebody wanted to speak on one agenda item and then on another, I think we may have to let them do that now.
Yeah, we'll probably just need to clean up the language. I think it's written as though they're speaking on one item. So maybe some clarity as far as per agenda item or non-agenda item. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mann. Good to have the legal eye on this.
Okay. I do have another question, though.
Okay.
And this has come up a couple times with speakers. In requiring them to give their address, there have been instances where people have said they don't want to give their address. And just as an operating procedure, how do we handle that situation? Do we let them speak, not let them speak?
Well, we have historically, whoever signed up, asked them to give their name and address, but we have not, in my recollection, denied anyone the opportunity to speak if they did not want to disclose their address.
Yeah. I guess, keep doing that?
I think so.
I believe
If
that-
someone says they prefer not, then we honor that
Yeah.
and move forward.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's one we should hang ourselves up on one way or the other.
Yeah.
I believe the city of College Station, when they introduce, they can just choose a neighborhood rather than the address.
Okay.
All right, fast forward. Lots of the next section has to do with the board meeting and the structure of the board meeting and those types of things of which you're all familiar with. So I'm going to move forward to page 14 that has quite a bit as in relation to board development. And some of it's cleanup, some of it's new, some of it's things that occur, but we need to put it in writing just to capture. This one I just did a little cleanup on. The first one, it said it previously workshop, retreat, training, the superintendent, the board superintendent team evaluates their effectiveness, reviews operating procedures, and conducts new board orientation. We bring the new board orientation that occurs as required by law. This is the first time we looked at board operating procedures in a little while, and I don't recall the last time the board really reflected on an evaluative piece. Maybe some of you that have been on the board for a while remember that process. So because I feel like it's buried in one statement, I kind of broke it out just to pull it out. Annually at a workshop, retreat, or training, the board conducts a self-evaluation. We can do that or not if there's an interest. We don't have to make it a huge burdensome activity as opposed to self-reflection and conversation. There's always, I think, strength in that as a team, but I'll leave that up to the group. The team of 8 reviews board operating procedures, so we'll just make this tradition. It had been occurring, well, inconsistently on an annual basis, but we'll make sure we do this around December, January of every year moving forward. and the new member 3-hour local orientation, that's required by law. We do 2 hours up front for candidates and an additional hour after the election. So I was pulling those out. Is everyone good with those? Any conversation on the self-evaluate? Is that something the group would be interested in? I know Ms. Nolan sent me a document you acquired from TASB at some point in time, and it's fairly broad, but it could generate, I think, some healthy conversation at times.
Is that a self-evaluation of the group as a whole, or
Yes.
Okay.
That's the way I read it.
That's what I was thinking too, and more along just to make sure that we are having that conversation at least once a year as a team of 8.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to have it.
I think it lets us reflect and,
Right.
you know, hey, we're having the right conversations, we're not, we're spending too much time on this, not enough on this, or, you know, it provides opportunity. We put it here, then I'll make sure and be more accountable for ensuring that it happens.
And I just needed a little reminder to check myself every now and then as well. So that would do that as well.
The way it's written in here is kind of buried, so okay?
And I think I have one question on those 3. The way I read that, I'm good with all of them, but the way I read it, it makes it look like they all happen at one workshop. Does anybody else see it that way? And I'm not sure, I mean, like, obviously the new member orientation is not, so if that's just me, that's okay, but they would be.
I think where he separates it, the annually at workshop/retreat.
Just need to throw in an or,
Maybe,
or training.
or,
Yeah, workshop or retreat or, yeah.
so,
Okay,
Or each of the following, maybe or I don't. Although the first 2 we could do together, right? That's right, okay.
Okay, the next criteria and process for electing board officers. I struck through process because we want to address that below. The criteria for being a board officer, that stays consistent. I believe everyone's familiar with that. There were no suggestions along those lines. What I did want to attempt to capture is I know there's deliberation in executive, just as far as executive officers. So we try that y'all have used a process, I think, recommended or suggested through TASB several years ago, and I think it has worked efficiently for the group. And y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems as though executive the last couple of years moved much quicker than in years past. And I remember the group several commenting about it was just cleaner and seemed more effective and efficient from a time-wise. So I tried to capture that in writing. I did have council kind of look at this as well. So that's this wording captured here, I believe, reflects the process and the integrity of council. Does this look like the process the group goes through to deliberate officers? And again, I'm not familiar with the process other than what I
yeah,
read
I mean,
here.
it's what we've done the last 2 years. I
And
feel-
we do distinguish, I'm sorry, Mr. Horak, between closed session and
Right, I saw
taking
that.
formal action in open session.
Yeah, that would be, especially for new board members, so that they understand kind of how that process works. But yeah, the defining of it, I think, is definitely beneficial going forward.
Because I think the process has been inconsistent until the last couple of years.
My only follow-up question to that would be in regard to in open session, when it says when consensus is reached, there's always the possibility there's not a consensus reached.
We can just say formal actions taken on the slate of officers in open session.
Okay.
Because when formal actions taken, some types of consensus or majority vote is addressing that.
Yeah, I guess
Correct.
that's true when you think about how you define consensus. And I had, Mr. Martindale, one other thing on this that I didn't send you, but in the criteria for selecting board officers, right above where we're at right now.
Yes, sir.
It says officer elections are held following the November general election of each year. Could we just add in there, officer elections are held at the first called meeting of the board? Something like that.
Yes, sir. Okay.
What's that?
Would it ever not be November?
I mean, I guess we could put it off till December or.
Well, sometimes because of canvassing, people are not sworn in until December.
And committee assignments. And Jeff and I kind of, I don't know, it's amazing how things historically just occur, and then sometimes you go, I'm not sure why it's done that way. You know, it always has felt awkward, and so this is one of those. And if the group prefers not, that's fine with me. Typically, committee assignments are what has happened historically. We have the November election, the realignment of executive portion of the board, new members coming together. And the first thing the board president does is solicit feedback from the group about various committees. And then we have committee membership changes moving into January. So it feels like an awkward change. So it's middle of the year. So then we have new representatives possibly on DEIC or PAC in different areas. So it just doesn't feel smooth. Now, it may be the best way. I don't know. That's the way it's always been. But I try to grab something in writing that I think may be a little bit cleaner for us instead of turning the entirety of the apple cart over in December and January with our committees. So board president, I need to fix that. Board president should seek input, make committee assignments, and I put each July for the preceding school year. So it's good for everybody except anyone transitioning on or off the board, right? So everyone else would stay consistent. And that's why I thought July, because then we're situated going into August. Committee assignments should be made for the following. This is all these are all the ones that we typically assign, understanding that, and I have an asterisk there, that we'll have ad hoc committees from time to time, and we can make those assignments as they come up. For board membership changes November, new board members should assume the membership of the member of whom they replaced. And read that real quick if you can. So in essence, this past go around, Dr. Payne and Mr. Decker would have just assumed the membership of Mr. Nugent and Ms. Green. We'd had to kind of take and that way everybody else would have stayed consistent through the process instead of changing everybody around. Just feels cleaner to me. Y'all may disagree. Thought I might get that in there to get conversation with the group.
In general, I very much like it because, yeah, I mean, I've had that awkward swap in the middle of the year sometimes where it was not clean. I would say one other thing that might occur, though, I'm a little worried maybe about making it so defined, like number 3, maybe, because what about when we change executive committee? I think that's the other thing that does happen, you know, in the fall, is that I was just trying to think through that and whether that becomes an issue, right? Usually executive committee maybe doesn't do as many other committees because they're doing executive committee, but not necessarily.
I think timing wise, as far as time of day, I mean, it wouldn't have any of these committees, as stated, I don't feel affect the executive committee meetings. So I don't think that would come into play. I see what you're saying on, you know, exec committee might not do as many just of the other committees just because of the commitment there. But I think we could kind of take that into consideration as it occurs.
That's what I would hope.
So
yeah. So if we're putting this in policy, do we still have some flexibility adjust? That's kind of
it's not policy. It's procedure.
This part would not be in policy.
So,
okay.
But just like if someone replaces somebody else, I mean, in the case of the 2 guys that came on in November, you know, if they would have backfilled Nugent and Green spots, but let's say their time commitment doesn't allow for it, then we have to make an adjustment.
Exactly.
We don't have a choice. So I think it's like Mr. Martindale said, it's a procedure we want to put into place so that we have some kind of structure for it. But then obviously can move and adjust accordingly should that occur in November/December.
Yeah, I don't think,
That's what I was
Right.
just thinking, wanted to kind of clarify. Thank you.
I don't think that language would prevent that from happening, so that's, yeah.
Yeah, and this is the only piece in policy is that very first, the ethics part. The rest of this is exactly what it says, board operating procedures. So board has discretion over all of this. Doesn't, it can happen with general consensus and conversation. It doesn't necessarily require formal action. So I'm going to try to close this out here fairly quickly if possible, to be respectful of everyone else's time and give y'all a few minutes. It is Board Appreciation Month, and we have dinner ready for y'all, and I'd like that to happen before the regular meeting. So I'm going to circle back to page 2, if you don't mind, and ask for the group to give me some direction. It is the preference of the board. We can play with wording. We can, if the belief of the group, if we don't need it at all, that's entirely up to this group. I tried to capture the feedback I was provided so that all 7 could see and have conversation around it. So where we stood before was adding constructive to the mission of the district.
I think that's more specific. What was your intent? I mean, as you wrote it, what were you really trying to get at with what was constructive or not? I think we're kind of hung up on that word, but what was your intent there?
I say my intent was that I believe that
I
as
meant more from Mr. Martindale.
I know this my wording
The
is
recommendation came from Mr. Hall.
I believe that we as board members are ambassadors and should be very positive influence when we're out in the public. And I just want to make sure that we're aware if we make negative comments that those do have repercussions. Because when I say district, we're talking students, faculty, staff. The district's more than a thing. And so when we make statements, those have repercussions. And so I was trying to have something that said that we need to be very mindful of what we say.
And with that intent, I'm not going to object to constructive. I like it tightens it up as constructive to the mission, but also I'd caveat, then I would recommend that we move the the one at the bottom, student focused, up at the top, just so it's the preceding thing that everything we're doing as a district, administrators, teachers, and board members is for the students. And so it reckons back to that.
It doesn't spell ethics anymore, but that's okay. If you understand.
Oh, is that why?
I was wondering why Fort Bend had like almost all the same wording except for they renamed those headings. That's interesting.
Well, okay, so speaking of that, because I thoroughly agree with the thought behind, intent behind Mr. Hall's language. But so Leander, for example, says, make every reasonable effort to protect the integrity and promote the positive image of the district.
I like that.
So would something like that maybe?
I like that so much better. The positive verbiage first.
I like
and
the
it gets to the point.
I like the positive less constructive because it's warts and all. We can say, hey, this is a problem and admit that, but that's not positive. And saying we're going to fix it being constructive, which if we go to, so I like not detrimental, because detrimental is just negative in every context. So as long as I'm not making detrimental comments, you can make constructive criticism, but it doesn't have to be a cheerleader role. No offense.
So thoughts on the wording Mr. Ben shared with us?
Can you read that one more time? I liked it.
Make every reasonable effort to protect the integrity and promote the positive image of the district. And then, yeah.
I like that.
Can we stick with Mr. Hall's suggestion of mission of the district instead of positive?
Yeah, mission, not image, is what I would hang up on.
Again, if we're getting
Yeah.
hung up on the
What does
semantics
image
of
mean?
words, I have a hard time with positive because it's, as we said, it's not always. I mean, we want to be, but
I tell you what, let me do this. Let me take some of that wording, craft it around mission as well, and see if I can't wordsmith this for consideration. And I will share and transmittal well in advance, and we'll bring this back around February and clean up the cover, change the wordings that we discussed today, and make those adjustments, and have any final conversation, and then look for some action on it. How's that work for the group?
Sounds good. Mr. Martindale, I know you're trying to move us along, and I appreciate that. I just have one
Okay.
kind of why is it the way it is question maybe, is when I was looking through other school districts, at least a lot of them, at least on their websites, appeared to have their board operating procedures and their policies as one document instead of two. And so, because like, for example, the election of officers, we have that in our operating procedures, and then we also have
In policy.
in policy. And I didn't know if, there's any thought of we just have one document as opposed to two, or.
And if you notice policies referenced after each of these sections, that's where some of the language is captured. I think it's twofold, Mr. Ben. We need to have the policy. Some of it's legal, some of it's local. Because if we start messing with policy, we'll have to take formal action to address that. We'll need to run it through TASB and just get some direction on wording. I wouldn't recommend that we start messing with policy over this. What I think this is, having a separate document, is it's an easy go-to for board members for direction in particular circumstances. I think it's ease of use is what I think it's for.
Sounds good to me.
That is what I see this document. It's an easy go-to for board members, as opposed to you trying to figure out which particular policy you need to look up for direction. Good? All right, guys. Thank you very much.
All right, with that, we'll move to item 2, consideration and discussion regarding the 2022-23 school calendar. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Horak. We have our Chief Academic Officer, Dr. Penny Trammell, here with us. She's going to share the information she shared with DEIC last week, our voting results from our calendar options, and the recommendation being put forward later this evening in the regular board meeting. Again, this will be an action item at our regular meeting later, and it's the 22-23 school calendar. Dr. Trammell?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Martindale. Good evening, everyone. Wanted to just briefly remind the board of the steps in the calendar adoption. The DEIC did begin this process in October, and in December, at the December 12th DEIC meeting, narrowed the calendar choices for community input down to 2. The calendar choices were posted on our CSISD website on December the 13th and were up through January the 7th, 2022 for input. And then at our January meeting, DEIC considered community input on the calendar, and we are coming tonight on the regular board agenda to make a recommendation to you all. In looking at information regarding stakeholder input, first, we look at who voted. We had 2,707 votes. You will notice those votes were made up of parents, teachers, other school staff, students, and community members. You will notice on the far right that those percentages do not equal 100. That is because when voting, people have to identify themselves, and some people identify as a parent and a teacher, so they would go into both of those categories. So that's just a brief explanation of why those percentages don't add up to 100 on the right. As we look at the different groups that voted, the first group we'll look at is parents, and overall, you'll notice that around 57% of our parents voted for calendar B. If you look to the left, that's broken down into the different levels across the district. And if you notice on the far right, calendar B was unanimous in the votes that parents put forth for the calendar choices. The next group is community members, and again, calendar B was the community's choice with around 56% of the community voting for calendar B. As we look at the teacher group, you will see just a fairly close at intermediate and middle school grades voting, but in general, the overall choice for the teacher group was calendar B, again, with close to 55% of the vote. Looking at other school staff, calendar B was the choice, and that was by a nose, as they say. When looking at our student group, you'll notice that calendar B again was the very clear choice with the student group. You will also notice that we didn't have a lot of student participation. I think we talked about this a little bit last year. We did send this out on social media, and we did post it on the website, and we did send parents email blasts through school messengers. The good news in these numbers is we have recently activated 9th through 12th grade students' email accounts. So hopefully, as we post the calendar next year, we can send those students a personal email to vote or give input on the calendar. So we're excited about that. In looking at the results overall, you'll see the breakdown of the 2,707 votes. And again, with 56% of the vote, calendar B was the choice of our community stakeholders, or of our stakeholders in general. I did put a copy of calendar B underneath your packet. Some of you, I see, have found it. So you can have just a brief moment to look at that. I've also linked it in here, so we can pull that up and look. Basically, on calendar B, teachers start midweek and students start midweek, as opposed to this year where teachers started on Monday at the very beginning of the week. So it kind of breaks that up a little bit for them, and then it breaks up the students' first week of school. October looks pretty much the same with 2 professional learning days. November for students looks the same. For teachers, there are 2 comp days that would allow them to obtain professional development sometime in the summer or throughout the fall up into November 21st for those comp days. And then early release is the same as it was this year, in that we will get out the day before the holiday and an early release day. We do have another comp day in January, and then we have Martin Luther King Day as a holiday. In February, President's Day is a professional development day, and that's a little different from this year, because this year we had the Friday and the Monday for professional development on the calendar. And then if you look on into April, calendar B has the 7th, which is the Good Friday, off. We do have a professional development day on the 10th. And so for our educators and staff, we will work on the 10th. For families, that could potentially be a longer weekend if there's not a teacher in the family that works in CSISD. And then another difference in this calendar from this year would be there is a professional development day on the 27th. So that is essentially the input on our calendar for the 22-23 school year. And like I said, we will be coming at the regular board meeting to make a recommendation from DEIC for calendar B for the 22-23 school year. And so at this time, any questions?
Thank you. I mean, I think we've said this before, this calendar is very similar to what we've had the last few years, so I think our community seems to be kind of coming around with that. Although the votes weren't maybe as strong as I would have thought for this. I was just curious, based on some of the feedback and notes and stuff, what were maybe the biggest things that people either, whichever way they said it,
Sure.
didn't like about this one or
the other
wanted
one,
in
A,
calendar A?
I think, comp days, school start times, those things are always hot topics. The week of, November is always a hot topic. That wasn't so much of an issue this year with the 2 calendar choices. But in general, start of school, and people were just kind of, the comments in the feedback were, one person liked having the 7th and 10th of October. Another person wanted a holiday there. And so I think there were minute things that shifted people either way. And some people said they're very similar. It doesn't matter. I'm going to vote for, B or whatever. And so the comments were pretty kind of split on the two because they were fairly similar if you looked at A and B.
And one other, I know I asked about comp days last month and got good feedback that most of our teachers have an opportunity to take those comp days, earn those comp days, I guess. How about other staff, though, besides teachers?
Sure. We have EduHero, which is an online system where our paraprofessionals frequently earn comp time. The paraprofessionals in my office earn comp time through there. So there's just a huge database of professional development options.
Our paraprofessional staff and some of those may not necessarily utilize EduHero in training, but may pick up additional hours through the course of the beginning school and getting students enrolled and those types of things. Mm-hmm. So they can accumulate a certain number of hours that they can apply to comp time for these days as well. So it's not necessarily training. They're just working beyond their allotted hours per week that rolls into compensatory time. Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question? Okay.
I just feel like I want to make sure that all our other staff has the opportunity to have that full week at Thanksgiving off as well. Right? And
240s don't have that option, Ms. McAdams, so I have to take leave. But if y'all want to change that, that's fine with me.
Uh-oh. Glad I asked. No.
So it is split. You're welcome.
All right, that will bring us to item 3, consideration and discussion regarding the work of the Academic Achievement and Class Rank Committee related to board policy. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Horak. We have our Executive Director of Secondary Education, Ms. Tiffany Parkerson, here with I believe it's 12 slides. Is that correct, Ms. Parkerson? Update on the work of our Class Rank GPA Ad Hoc Committee. Ms. Parkerson?
You threw me off with the 12 slides. I think it might be 10. We'll see.
Oh, that's even better. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Since we last discussed the Academic Achievement and Class Rank Committee, we have had one committee meeting. And so as Mr. Martindale alluded, this will be a brief update to show you the progress that we have made. So just a quick reminder that our committee's charge was originally to determine whether any changes needed to be recommended, and now we're at the point where we are refining those recommendations and changes. I also, anytime we discuss this, want to make sure to reiterate once again that any changes that would be implemented would be for an incoming freshman class, and that no current high school students would be impacted. We have broken the current policy into three large sections, but there are actually 4 pieces within our current policy. At this point, we've taken a look at the weighted grading system. We have had some robust conversation that I'll share with you about in the second section, and then we'll end with looking at the local graduation honors. So I've shared the process. I'm going to move forward there. This is our current weighted grading system in the current policy. The committee has managed to reach consensus here in this area from changing from a 2-tiered system to a 3-tiered system. The major changes here would be that these Tier 1 and Tier 2 courses of advanced placement and advanced courses are currently all in the same tier. The committee felt strongly about dividing those into 2 different tiers. And dual credit has not been included in GPA prior to this, and they would like to explore including that as well. Note that tentatively it is here, and we're having continuing conversation about dual credit. And just after the last meeting, I know heading into the next meeting, I'll begin by providing some clarification regarding the difference between academic dual credit and technical dual credit and CTE courses before we move forward there. The committee has also moved forward on decision 2, looking at what we want to have in our conversion system here for GPA. So last month I shared that there was consensus on wanting to make sure that an unweighted 4.0 equated to a 90. There was also consensus about extending advanced course weights the whole way down to 70, that if a student earned a credit in an advanced course, we wanted to give them that GPA boost as well. At the last meeting, we added this third bullet to the consensus that there is a desire for the committee to include both a weighted GPA and an unweighted GPA on a student's transcript, because depending on what scholarship they're applying for or for colleges, universities, there's a purpose for each of those two things. Really, that weighted GPA would come more into play for us with our delineation of our honors graduates, class rank, and so forth. Okay. Last month, I'd previewed this as an example based on the committee's feedback, and after last month's meeting, or last week's meeting, rather, we did reach consensus on choosing this to be our conversion chart, or our current recommendation for the conversion chart. They looked at 5 different options that represented the different notations from the committee. And then we really started the conversations about consistent application for graduating class and the inclusions and exclusions of which courses should be included for those purposes, as far as what should be in a weighted GPA, what should be included for a student's class rank, and we left that meeting in the midst of a really in-depth conversation. And so in order to better prepare for our next meeting, which is next Monday, I've sent out a Google Form survey to all the committee members to provide some feedback and direction to make sure that we are really addressing the questions that they have, that we are all understanding the terms in the same way, so that we can reach consensus in this area as well. There are some schools that do, like our current policy, include all courses. There are others who have designated certain semesters of courses and so forth. And I shared some examples of those via the transmittal, so you can see what the committee saw as well, if you're interested in looking at the wide array of options that we have here to consider regarding the consistent application for graduating class piece. And then finally, the last decision will be about local graduation honors, which gets into setting the points, the cutoff points for the different types of honor graduates, determining when we would calculate those honor graduates, and so forth. All right. I'd be happy to answer any questions should you have any. All right.
Crystal clear, Ms. Parkerson.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Just a comment that, guys, this decision, my comment is that I think I've been so good with all the decisions up to this point. I mean, and getting consensus with that group. This decision 3 seems very difficult and so I have complete faith that we will work through it with your leadership there. But it's a tough decision, and again, one that, I mean, we have this whole benchmark of all these other schools, other schools we're looking at, and it's all across the board on how different schools make the decisions they've made, what they include in their GPA calculations, their weighted calculations. So
I just once again want to say thank you, and if you could extend our thank you to everyone on that committee for sticking through this and continue, because this has been an extended committee.
yes.
So thank you again for all of your hard work, all of you.
I will relay that. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Item 4, consideration and discussion regarding Texas Association of School Boards Board Policy Update 118 with associated resolutions and proposed new policies. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Horak. We have our Chief Administrative Officer, Ms. Molly Perry, here to lead us through this agenda item. There's, of course, Update 118, which she'll touch briefly on. You do have handouts and a folder at your seat, a couple of resolutions, one of which has to do with where resignations can be submitted, and the other with the, calling SHAC and laying protocol out for it to ultimately make recommendations to the board about instructional materials, and a couple of local policies that have to do with IEPs and dyslexia training. So here with additional detail, and again, this will be an item we're have for action at the regular meeting. I believe it's a consent item. So, Ms. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Martindale. Mr. Horak, good evening, members of the board. Last month, we spent some time reviewing TASB Update 118, which primarily consists of recommendations arising from our most recent regular legislative session. We will have subsequent updates with the following sessions that did occur into the fall this year. And so I'd like to begin with 118, and then after that, spend a few minutes speaking to the resolutions, because we really didn't have all that much time to discuss them previously, although they were in the transmittal for your review. And then lastly, speak to any final questions you might have regarding the new local policies around dyslexia and early childhood transition for special education. With that, are there any questions related to 118 or additional clarifications that I can provide?
I did have that one question about 118, and sorry I can't find it in here, but it was, we talked a little bit about it a couple months ago, but it was specifically about the comprehensive school counseling program. I guess why and the policy is going to have some kind of minimum requirement of that the counselors have to spend their time on this program. I guess I just wanted to understand more what that program is. I know our counselors do a variety of important roles across all of our schools, and I just wanted to understand what that program.
And Ms. McAdams, I think it's third page in the packet that she provided you. Local DP, I believe, is what you're referencing.
That blue stuff. Yep.
Exactly.
Perfect.
So
Thanks.
There is a corresponding update to legal policy in this particular area. The intent of the legislative action that occurred was to ensure that our counselors are spending time on a counseling program rather than being pulled into other administrative duties. And so this local policy language does not only further codify what is changing in the legal policy, but really speaks to the option for boards to have flexibility there. We are not requesting flexibility in that particular area. We believe that our counselors do need to be spending their time on that school counseling program. The Texas Education Agency does have a document. It's very extensive. In fact, I looked it up just to confirm, is 192 pages. And it is called the Texas Model for Comprehensive School Counseling Programs, most recently revised in 2018. In that document, there are 12 responsibilities that are aligned with state statute or the Texas Education Code, and then further defined in terms of what that school counseling program encompasses. Those include things such as program management, guidance, counseling, consultation, coordination, student assessment, advocacy, leadership, professional behavior, and professional standards. Our counselors are very familiar with this document. Ms. Hester, of course, as the director over that school counseling program, works with them to look at this. Specifically in response to the new legislation, we have been spending some time looking at job descriptions of our counselors. We are gathering feedback from our counselors regarding their specific roles and responsibility on their campus, and then we are going to move forward and synthesize that information to ensure that those job descriptions are in alignment with the actual responsibilities. Just dust those off, make sure they're all accurate, and if we do need to make any adjustments administratively, it would be with the responsibilities of those individuals rather than coming to the board for an exemption from that 80% rule. That is our plan at this point.
Okay, I think all that makes sense. And again, I just am kind of asking, kind of understanding trying to figure out what the state has in mind about this. And it sounds like we are, certainly well in compliance, that our counselors are doing the role that not only the state thinks they should be doing, but we think they should be doing as well.
I would say we are in the process of reviewing to make sure that we are in compliance. Okay. One other aspect that I think it's important for us to remember is that when state law does pass, we also have subsequent commissioner rules, and those have not yet been released for this particular area. So there could be some things in those rules that speak more specifically to what that 80% of time is encompassing. And so we don't want to also move too quickly when we know that we will have commissioners' rules.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, I'll just say one thing that comes to my mind always with counselors is, is addressing the mental health needs of our students, which Absolutely. We know has been a growing need over the last, particularly the last couple years. And So just trying to understand how that is a part of what they do, maybe a little bit better. We know it's a part of what they do, and I'm assuming that's somehow on the list and is.
Absolutely. We have guidance counselors at all of our campuses, and of course, our comprehensive high schools have multiple. In addition to that, we do have 2 counselors that are not assigned to a campus that really are focusing in on those very specific, more intensive mental health needs. Additionally, our special education department employs licensed specialists in school psychology to work with not only assessment but also provision of service for more intensive needs as well.
I appreciate you trying to summarize that 100 and something page document for me. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions regarding Policy Update 118? All right. With that, let's move to the resolutions. The first of which you will find in your packet in the top right corner is labeled DFE Exhibit. You will see there is a front and back to this. They are very similar. In that they are regarding employees' resignations. In policy, with the adoption of 118, there would be a need to provide additional delegation for whom may accept employee resignation, specifically contract employees, both during the school year as well as at the end of the school year. And so our proposal is the adoption of a resolution that would continue our existing practice of allowing the employee's direct supervisor to accept that resignation if it is at the end of the contract year. If an employee does tender their resignation mid-contract, then only the superintendent or the director of talent management would be authorized to accept that resignation. So that is DFE Exhibit A and B.
And this is our current practice.
Yes, sir. All right. And then next we have Exhibit EHAA, and this is in response to new policy EHAA, both legal and local, stipulating additional requirements around the SHAC or the School Health Advisory Council's responsibilities as it relates to recommendations, not action, but recommendations for curriculum materials specifically related to human sexuality instruction. And so you'll note there are 3 items on this particular resolution that would direct SHAC to, number 1, hold at least 2 public meetings on those curriculum materials before adopting recommendations. 2, ensure that those recommended curriculum materials comply with the instructional content requirements in law, et cetera. And 3, present those recommendations to the board by May 31 of this year. It may be worth noting too that this is the first revision in this area in over 20 years. And so I would not anticipate that we would need to consider this again for quite some time. All right. And lastly, related to action in the regular meeting, and you all have seen this on several occasions, we have 2 new, albeit brief, policies related to students with special needs. EHBAA local is regarding the transition of children who are being served by early childhood intervention prior to their 3rd birthday to the district, and shall ensure that we have that IEP developed by their 3rd birthday. This is very much in alignment with our practice and federal law. And so there would not be any administrative changes as a result. Then EHB is related to training opportunities for teachers of students with dyslexia that include new research and practices for educating students with dyslexia. Similarly, does not require a change in our practice, but rather including that in our local policy.
These are recommended updates to our local from TASB, correct?
Yes, sir.
To clean up and
That is
capture
correct.
it in policy, even though it's already our procedure.
Yes, TASB has made a recommendation to us specifically, along with a number of other districts around the state who are about to engage in on-site monitoring as part of a regularly scheduled cycle that TEA has begun to implement. And so they have recommended that we go ahead and include this so that we don't have to do it in response to that visit, but rather preemptively.
Just a quick question. On the shack resolution,
Yes.
item 3, this is to be annual, correct? Or is it just one time?
We believe that really it would be one time at this point
Okay.
because it has been over 2 decades since the last opportunity to engage in this process of curriculum adoption, that we would not need to do an annual review.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Any final questions?
No? Anything? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Perry.
And that will bring us to the last item, adjournment. We will adjourn and come back for main meeting.